Welcome to the video lecture about the Jewish 1960s. This is going to be a relatively brief lecture because there's a lot of readings, and that's where the bulk of your bulk of your learning about this topic is going to come from. So what's interesting about the 1960s, of course, is that we have a generation that's coming in age after World War II, and history is becoming sentimental. Take a look at Fiddler on the Roof, which appeared in 1964, which has an anti-Semitic background in terms of the setting of that movie, but they give it kind of a soft, fuzzy glow. The main character sings the song "If I Were a Rich Man," but in post-World War II America, Jews are in fact becoming much more affluent than in the past. So we're going to start by talking about Lenny Bruce, and we've got two videos that I'd like you to watch. The first one is Let Me Explain Jewish and Goyish to You. Lenny Bruce is a comedian who came up in the late 1950s into the early 1960s and was very irreverent, kind of similar to Alan Sherman, who we talked about last time. He never hesitated to put Judaism in the forefront of his comedy. And this particular bit about what is Jewish and what is Goyish, Goyish meaning not Jewish, is fascinating and is a little bit difficult to understand, but I'll tell you, those people who are Jewish kind of get it right away. So why don't you take a look at the URL there, pause the video, and take a look, or listen. There isn't any video with this one. Listen to Lenny Bruce, Jewish and Goyish. Okay, welcome back. Now what I'd like you to do is take a look at this video. This is Lenny Bruce appearing on the very first episode of Playboy's Penthouse. And I apologize if that is a little offensive to you. What we're really looking at here is Lenny Bruce, and while it's a very long video, you really don't have to start the video until 5 minutes and 45 seconds in, and the bit that we're really concerned about actually starts at 8 minutes 30 seconds, where Lenny Bruce talks about his appearances on the Steve Allen Show, and then goes into a joke. He's talking about what is offensive, what is not offensive, and goes into a joke that concludes at about 13 minutes in the video. The joke talks about Jews with tattoos, that they can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's actually not true, but it's a Jewish misconception that has incredible power in the Jewish community. So why don't you pause the video and take a look at that bit of Lenny Bruce on Playboy's Penthouse. Okay, so what makes the 1960s Jewish? Well, there's no other decade in the 20th century that had more lasting consequences on the state of American Jewry. There was a rise of Jewish pride and Jewish consciousness, revitalization of religious communal organizations, and particularism, meaning that people were not afraid to say that they are Jewish. You'll remember in the last lecture I talked about how the most Jewish thing that you could do after World War II is to be not Jewish, so things are changing now in this decade. And one of the things that really, and the articles that will kind of give you an introduction to this are Hertzberg's America is Galut. The introduction to the Jewish Catalog is particularly fascinating. That came out just after the 1960s, but it really talks about the sense of ownership that especially young Jews had for Judaism. One of the things that dominated the 1960s was the American Jewish community's advocacy for releasing Soviet Jewry. It's difficult to imagine, maybe not so difficult to imagine for some people, about how the Soviet Union was such a closed and repressive society before it became the former Soviet Union. A couple readings here: The Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, Am I Brother's Keeper, and Elie Wiesel, Fear and Heroism. Then Vietnam. Jews were actually on both sides of the war in Vietnam. They were against the war, and some thought that it was something important to take a stand on, and a lot of that had to do with the American Jewish community's view of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was offering military aid to North Vietnam. And so to oppose U.S. involvement meant to indirectly support the Soviet Union and the PLO, which were opponents of Israel. So the reading here is Arthur Lelyvelt's article. And then the Six-Day War is really a capstone event for the American Jewish community. On June 5th, 1967, Israel was attacked by more than 400,000 soldiers from Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. And it was at this point that Israel captures the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, the entire Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. And it more than doubled the area of Israel. It also began what has been happening for the last 50 years of Israel's occupation of Palestinian refugees who are in the occupied territories. And this reading is Rosenberg's My Evolution as a Jew. Then we have Jewish radicals. So the 1960s is really known as a time of hippies and radical movements. Take a look here at Rosenberg's article, The Jewish Uncle Toms. Rosenberg was a student at the State University of New York at Albany, and he rose to prominence after publishing this particular article. And then there's Weissman's article, Radicals Invade Federation, and Aviva Cantor-Zuckoff's article, Oppression of America's Jews and the Jewish People's Peace Treaty, interview with Meir Kahane, and the JDL, Politics of Jewish Experience. The JDL is a particularly interesting organization. The FBI actually categorizes it as a terrorist organization, and it originally rose to combat Soviet Jewry. The JDL did not hesitate to use armed conflict and terrorist-type activities to further their agenda. It really does not exist so much anymore. Its founder, Meir Kahane, moved to Israel and then started a political party that actually the state of Israel deemed was racist and outlawed. Then we have Jewish counterculture. This is the rise of the Havurah movement, where you have synagogues and other Jewish communities that create micro-communities of people who can get together and find meaning in gathering in smaller groups. So that would be Barak's article, The Havurah. And then the last part of this particular unit has to do with sexuality and feminism, and there's really nothing Jewish about the sexual revolution of the late 1960s and the early 1970s, but there are certainly situations in which Jews responded to things that were going on. And that would be the articles, Rabbi Conducts Jewish Gay Service, Rabbi Bans Hot Pants, and then Jewish Women, Life Force of a Culture. That concludes this lecture.